Yo guys, how are you doing? Welcome back to Rule of Two Review, and today we have some slightly good news coming from Capcom of all places. So I know that Capcom is a very controversial and polarizing developer and company within the video game industry, and especially amongst the Nintendo gamer, and even more especially throughout the last few months, most notably due to how everything with Monster Hunter and Monster Hunter World has played out. During E3, it was revealed as a PlayStation 4 and Xbox One game. We, of course, saw no word of that game coming to the Nintendo Switch, which we all expected a game like that to eventually come to the Switch because, duh, there's 1,000 reasons why it makes sense for that to happen. And they ended up confirming after E3 that that is not the case. Instead, a couple of weeks before E3, they of course did show us Monster Hunter Double Cross coming to the Nintendo Switch, which is basically just an HD remaster remake of the previous year's 3DS Monster Hunter game, Monster Hunter Generations, which is a great game that I own for the 3DS, and I love it very much. I think Monster Hunter 4 was the better game, but it was still very, very good. And then we even got news that not only is that remaster the only game the Switch is getting, it's not even coming out in the West. I don't even know if it's coming out in the UK and Europe. It may or may not, but for sure it seems like a Japan-only release. And so for that and many other reasons, no Mega Man collection, all these different things, Capcom has definitely made a lot of Nintendo fans not so happy. Now, what I will say before I get into this piece of news about Capcom is that even as a diehard Nintendo fan, I do still enjoy Capcom. I agree with all of the reasons a lot of people are upset with them, or a lot of the reasons that people maybe don't trust them. They've made a lot of weird, boneheaded decisions and mistakes, and created really dumb controversies, especially over the last decade. They just have turned into a really weird company. But in the same breath, and I've said this a few times, they still will consistently bring out a game every couple of years, or do something every few years that keeps myself as a fan pretty invested, and they release something that I end up loving, even amidst all the other crap that they continually seem to do, especially to the Nintendo gamers sometimes, such as still they've been releasing Nintendo exclusive Monster Hunter games for several years in a row up until this Monster Hunter World announcement. They of course do have the Resident Evil series, one of my all-time favorite franchises. And Resident Evil 7 came out this year, absolutely freaking spectacular. So it's like, they keep doing these dumb boneheaded things, but then they pepper them with all these really cool things that makes me just be like, oh, I gotta like you a little bit. So anyway, the most immediate thing that we're talking about today was, it was reported today that apparently Ultra Street Fighter 2 The Final Challengers, I couldn't remember the subtitle, for the Nintendo Switch, this game obviously right here, sold pretty damned well on the Nintendo Switch. Far better than pretty much anyone, including Capcom, could have foreseen or expected. That's great news all around for a lot of reasons, and through that, Capcom seems to now be talking openly and outwardly about developing even more Nintendo Switch games, or versions or ports of other games that they're making and bringing them over to the Nintendo Switch, something that previously seemed to not be happening. The very weird situation with Capcom was all these reports about how they helped Nintendo build a better Switch. Apparently the final version of the Switch is as good as it is because Capcom helped convince Nintendo to do so, and then they've basically been shunning the console ever since, with the exception of this one game, which is just a 25-year-old game anyway. All that stuff aside, still we got really great news as we learned that Ultra Street Fighter 2, The Final Challenger, sold 450,000 units, 450,000 copies since it launched now, whatever, 5, 6, 7 weeks ago. I'm not quite 100% sure. And man, that's awesome. I mean, could it possibly be on its way to 1 million? I don't know that I would believe it would go that high, but that's really impressive considering it's an older game. It's just a remaster or redo of a 25-year-old game. Granted, one of the best games ever made. The Nintendo Switch only has a handful of million units sold out there because it's only been out for a couple of months. It's a third-party game, which traditionally doesn't sell that well on a Nintendo console. And bam, there you go. I mean, there's a lot of factors that lead to that being a surprise success, but a welcome success. And now Capcom has all this information about maybe we want to bring other Switch games over, and it's pretty exciting. So what happened was on Twitter, there was a post from a fellow who works for the Wall Street Journal. He reports on gaming news every once in a while. His name is Takashi Mochizuki, And he basically quoted this from a Capcom, maybe I think an investors meeting or something official, quoted from Capcom, and this is what he tweeted earlier today. Capcom, 450,000 is first quarter figure for Ultra Street Fighter 2, above its expectation, also, quote, starting to prepare multiple Switch version titles. Well, how do you do? That all sounds pretty fine and dandy, if I do say so myself. It's good news. Really glad that Street Fighter 2 sold so well. I'll tell you guys, this remaster of Street Fighter 2 is amazing. It is overpriced, absolutely overpriced, but it is so fun. The online is a blast. I really enjoyed the game. Once I realized that Chun-Li was the character I could kick some serious butt with, I was just in love with that game until, you know, ARMS came out, and I really didn't get too into that game. I was also really caught up with going through, like, the Metroid Prime games at the time, and now that Splatoon is out, just forget about it. I've been playing Splatoon and Implosion on my Switch, and I haven't really touched Street Fighter 2, but it is a great game, so it's great to see those sales. And then there's that vague statement about considering or starting to prepare, let me get the quote back up, I'm sorry, yeah, starting to prepare multiple Switch version titles. So that basically tells us, honestly, that's even better than I initially remembered it was, because it wasn't that they were considering bringing these games. They used the phrasing, or this fellow uses the phrasing, starting to prepare. That means, like, it's happening, it's gonna go down, we can expect new games, ports or otherwise, from Capcom on the Nintendo Switch. So what does this truly mean? We don't yet exactly know. Are they looking at porting recent or previous games that they've made that did not make it to the Nintendo console, whether it would have been the Wii U or the Switch, and now they want to do that? Do they want to bring multi-platform Switch ports of other upcoming Capcom games that have yet to release? Are they looking at making brand new stuff that maybe hasn't been announced or that would be exclusive that would then be coming to the Switch? I mean, who knows? Any one or all of those things could be possible. Maybe it ends up being something even lamer than those and less exciting than all of those prospects. Don't know what that could be. Like I said, I love Capcom, but they're idiots consistently, so they might be doing something that really ends up just making everyone even more pissed. But I don't want to look at it from that perspective. I feel like this is mostly good news, both for the sales of Ultra Street Fighter 2 and for the reputation of third parties in Capcom on the Switch and what they might be looking at bringing to us soon. So what I wanted to do with you guys real quick is go over a quick bullet point list of a few titles and where they might rank in terms of their probability of showing up on the Switch, all according to my guessing and theorying and speculation. This is just me as a gamer talking about it. No rumors, no inside info that I'm trying to tell you guys that this is what's going to happen and you should start to believe this and spread this as rumor. This is me just spitballing and riffing these ideas. Okay, first, let's really quickly start on what I think are the best bets, the #1 shoo-ins that we can expect Capcom to start to bring to the Switch in some sort of possibly multi-platform, multi-port type of status. So these are your 3 best bets that we can expect to see most immediately based on what seems to be happening with Capcom right now. First and foremost is the obvious one that I've already touched on, and I'm gonna have to say Monster Hunter Double Cross. Now that one's kind of a cheat because it's already confirmed to be coming to the Switch, but as I said earlier in the video, the tricky thing is right now it's only confirmed for Japan and maybe the UK. I probably should have looked that up, but I didn't. But I think it's really just Japan only. It's for sure not coming to North America as of right now, but maybe through this news and this new information, they would finally say, yeah, we shouldn't be so boneheaded. Let's bring this game that's already coming to the Switch over to the West, over to North America and or Europe, because duh, that game sells really well on Nintendo handhelds and Nintendo consoles, not only in Japan, but over here in North America and worldwide. I mean, at this point, people know it as a Nintendo franchise for at least the last, whatever, 8-9 years since Tri first showed up on the Wii. So they would be silly not to do that. It's already basically, it's a planned Switch game. The localization already happened with the 3DS version. I mean, it would be a no-brainer. Just make that game a worldwide Switch title. You can almost bank on that one. The other one would be the Disney Afternoon Collection, this collection of old, like, 8-bit NES games that were Capcom Disney adaptations that already were released on a Nintendo console back in their original run in, like, the 80s and 90s, and that has, for some baffling reason, not been announced as a Switch title. Not even 3DS, I don't think. It's literally just PlayStation and Xbox, which just does not make sense. But now Capcom's like, ooh, maybe we should actually release some games on the Nintendo Switch, you know, the system that's selling like hotcakes, and we should obviously put these obvious games on the obvious Switch to make obvious money from all the obvious fans that want to buy these games. So I feel like Disney Afternoon Collection is another no-brainer. That game has to eventually show up if they're finally considering and realizing they should bring some of their games to the Switch audience. And then in that same vein would also be the Mega Man Legacy Collection 2, I believe it is labeled, like the second Mega Man Legacy Collection. But either way, the new old school Mega Man Collection game that's going to be launching sometime later this year as well. Also, bafflingly, bewilderingly not announced as a Switch title. I feel like that's the third absolute surefire thing that we can expect from Capcom. Monster Hunter Double Cross, Disney Afternoon Collection, Mega Man Legacy Collection. These games, they may not be the most exciting because literally every single one of them is a re-release of old games in different fashions and from different years. They're all re-releases and ports and remasters. But you know what? They are kind of exciting, and it would be a nice first foot in the door to get Capcom titles over to the Switch and to the Switch audience. So here's a couple of titles that I think are mostly not likely to happen, but I don't really want to rule out because I could see a way for Capcom to want to, if they wanted to be really brazen and really show that they want to be serious with supporting the Nintendo Switch for the serious gamer, they might consider these couple of titles. First would be Resident Evil 7. Yes, the game is older. It's now, well, older. It's been out for like, you know, since January, so it's been out like 6, almost 7, 8 months. So it's not like it's an ancient game. It's actually a very, very new and fresh game. There's even still DLC and stuff coming out for it. But it wouldn't be a brand new game. It's not an unreleased game. It would be porting a previously released game that did come out on the competing consoles, the PlayStation, Xbox, and I'm sure that there was a PC version of that as well. And I feel like we all want to see the Resident Evil series come back to Nintendo. This was a game that was rumored actually to come to the Switch anyway, even before the Switch launched, even before the Switch event in January, which was even before the game launched for the PS4 and Xbox One. People have been talking about Resident Evil 7 on the Switch. And I still overall think that this isn't likely. For some reason, I just don't see them revisiting a previously released current generation game. But to be fair, there is precedence in the sense that we are seeing Xenoverse 2. There's discussions about if Steep is ever going to come from Ubisoft, and those are games that released last year, but they might still be coming to the Switch, or they are, I should say, still coming to the Switch. So maybe Capcom would consider doing the same thing with Resident Evil 7. Another one here, which is also a pretty big long shot, you guys. I know that this is a long shot, but this one I'm not willing to a 100% rule out. And that would be Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Now, this one's tricky because no one even really wants this game. This game makes me, like, ragefully angry. And I know a lot of people feel the same way. A, it doesn't look that great. The mechanics and the character models seem weird. And they've totally screwed the pooch when it comes to not including the X-Men characters, all because of the stupid movie rights. I'm sure that that's Marvel's decision. And then they had the dumb Capcom quotes about, oh, people don't even remember the X-Men. The most famous comic book characters pretty much ever. Other than Batman and Superman, it's like the X-Men. I know that in the movie world, different Marvel characters are bigger and more well-known and making more money, but the X-Men are legendary. And the X-Men, even in the comic run, were very involved in the Avengers series and all that stuff happening. We just can't have them crossing on film. But also, when you talk about the movie world, the X-Men films, which I love, by the way, those still are very big movies. They're making a very big splash. They're making a lot of money for Marvel and for Fox. So anyway, that's a different conversation and a different rant. The point is, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite has its problems, is very controversial, but it is still going to be a very big push for Capcom, and it is one of the biggest video game series that they own, and maybe they're like, hey, this is the kind of game that could be successful on the Switch. I actually think that they have a strong case for a better audience on the Switch for that game than the other consoles, because those guys are really angry at that game and shunning the game, but maybe the Switch gamer would put aside some of that anger to pick up a cool fighting game on the Switch because it is the Switch. The last, not very likely, but slightly possible game would be a new game, something that we haven't yet seen, possibly even an exclusive game for the Switch. How crazy and cool would that be? It's been a while since we've seen something like that happen from Capcom or a lot of other developers. Nintendo did work very hard, and I think that they were mostly successful with this, with the Wii U, about getting some pretty decent third-party exclusive titles, and they even actually really did well with that in during the Wii days as well. And I feel like with the Switch, Nintendo would be very smart to start bringing that stuff back into the fold as well. I think that next year we might start to see a lot of titles like that finally getting announced from all sorts of different developers, and maybe Capcom would be one of the first ones on that slate to say, here is a new Capcom game, it's a new IP, it's a new game, it's a new whatever, and it's exclusive to the Nintendo Switch. That would be great and very, very huge. Or it could be even just a multi-platform game from Capcom that they are working on and planning to reveal sometime soon, and instead of making that just PS4 and Xbox One, maybe it would also include a Switch port. So those are the games: Resident Evil 7, Marvel vs. Capcom, and possibly a new game from Capcom that I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock or faith into, but do still sort of rest in that gray area of maybe they surprise us and bring us something like that that's really, really cool. So let's really quickly get to the one title that I'm going to put in the absolutely not happening category. We can bitch and moan and complain and whine and tweet and get angry all we want, and it may be justified, but I'm telling you guys, we're not going to see this game, as unfortunate as it is, and that is Monster Hunter World. I feel like Capcom has doubled down on that game, and whether it's all these rumors about Sony paying Capcom not to release it on the Switch, which I don't believe, by the way, but you never know. You know, whether it's that, whether it's the power of the consoles and they just don't feel comfortable making that run on the Switch, or whatever the case may be, I feel like Capcom has absolutely committed to saying that game is not a Switch title. It's not going to come to the Switch ever. I don't think it makes sense for them to waste their time after the fact. That game is coming out on the PS4 and Xbox One. I can't remember if there's a PC version or not. I don't think there is, but even if there is, fine. You get those 3 versions. I just don't see that one changing for some reason. My gut instinct tells me that game is meant to be exactly what it's been announced as. I do think they might change their mind, possibly on like the Resident Evil and MVC stuff, but I don't see them changing their mind on Monster Hunter World. It's a huge shame. That game, I think, could be great on the Switch. It could be very successful on the Switch. Nintendo and Capcom would make a lot of money. The gamers would be very happy and have a great game to play on the Switch. But it's just, I don't know what to say, guys. I just don't think it's happening. Now, lastly, let's talk about my one dark horse title. Yes, I have a surprise M. Night Shyamalan what a twist title that I wanted to throw into this list. And I think a lot of people aren't thinking about this game in general. No one's probably considering it alongside all of this Capcom and Nintendo Switch port kind of news from today. And so I was very excited to bring this into this conversation and throw it out there as something that I think could be a dark horse surprise possibility Capcom title to release on the Nintendo Switch. It's a multi-platform port. I would love to see this game show up as a day and date port, but regardless, this game I think could really show up on the Nintendo Switch, and that is the Resident Evil 2 remake. That is a game that has fallen off of everyone's radar, pretty much except for mine, and probably a few other, die-hard Resident Evil fans that might really be excited for that. I am immensely excited for the Resident Evil 2 remake. I think Resident Evil 2 is probably one of the top 3 Resident Evil games ever created. The original release on the PlayStation and the N64 and the Saturn version and all these different things. Of course, made its way eventually to the Wii with the re-releases and stuff. It's a great game. That is my favorite era of Resident Evil. Even though 4 is the best Resident Evil game, my favorite era is still the older tank control type of static camera angle stuff. And they did an amazing job with the first game's remake, even back in 2002 on the GameCube. They re-released it for HD consoles last year, also great. They also did Resident Evil 0, which was very exciting to see. To be fair with 0, they didn't add new stuff like they did in 2002 with the first game, but they did just make it prettier, and they made it run better, and they added some new controls. And it was fantastic to see them do that. I think that Resident Evil 0 is an underrated Resident Evil game. But Resident Evil 2 is not an underrated game because that is considered to be a classic and a masterpiece, rightfully so, one of my favorite games, and I'm very excited for this remake. I love the remake treatment they've given those other 2 Resident Evil games, and to know they're going to do it to 2 is so great. And this game would be a great Nintendo Switch title, and I think it is very much possible that it's one of the unreleased games on Capcom's slate that, per these quotes, that they're starting to prepare Nintendo Switch versions of games. I guarantee you they've moved that game into the very likely considered column. That game makes more sense to me on the Nintendo Switch than I think even a Resident Evil 7 or a Marvel vs. Capcom. And maybe you guys think that's a crazy statement, and that's fine. Who knows if any of these games that I'm talking about even turn out to be true. Maybe everything I've guessed today is completely wrong, or maybe they're all right or half all right. You never really know. But that's the one I really, really get excited to talk about. I think that Resident Evil 2 remake makes a lot of sense. You know, the first remake they ever did was on a Nintendo console. And yes, they shunned the Wii U and the Switch when it came to the re-release of the first game's remake, and then, of course, the remake of Resident Evil 0 last year. Yes, they shunned the console, but now they're seeing the Switch is great. It's selling really well. Our dumb, old 25-year-old game that we sold overpriced for 40 bucks also sold great. They made so much money on this game, I guarantee you, on the Switch, that this Resident Evil 2 remake, it just makes a lot of sense. It's not a lock, you guys, like those first 3 titles are locks, I feel. I will admit, Resident Evil 2 remake, not a lock, but I think it's at least 50-50. It's not, if not even higher, something like 70-30. Either way, that's my dark horse title. Resident Evil remake, Resident Evil 2 remake. Put your money on it. Remember this right here and now. Rob said it so that if it does happen, which I'm only guessing, if it happens, I was probably the first one you heard say that. So that's it, man. I'm not gonna lie. I'm surprised how much fun I had talking about this today. I think it's because, again, Capcom is an interesting company. There's so much to talk about. And the fact that I also had to talk about them specifically in relation to Nintendo and the Switch, very exciting. The controversy is always interesting with them, even if it's infuriating. And also, I am a fan of them and their series, and I get to talk about Resident Evil. I get to talk about Marvel vs. Capcom, and Mega Man, and Monster Hunter, one of my favorite series. There's just a lot going on there, and I just really enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun. So tell me what you guys think about the news, about, you know, the quotes about Capcom making Switch versions of games, about the sales for Ultra Street Fighter 2, about the list of games that I talked about today. Which ones do you agree with in the categories I put in? Which ones do you absolutely disagree with and think that I'm just like this big dummy for thinking it could release that way or whatever? Always fun to have those conversations and see you guys chatting about it in the comments. So that is going to be it for today. Talk about Capcom and Nintendo. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Real Life to Review, and as always, I will catch you next time on another video.